Christmas, the way that we celebrate it today, is really a relatively new holiday. The Americanized version evolved slowly over the last 300 years, starting strangely enough when the New York Times wrote an article about a group of Dutch families who decided to celebrate the death of Saint Nicholas in December of 1773. See, Christmas was already a thing, technically, but it was sort of a nothing, boring holiday, just marking the supposed birthday of Jesus. And even that part's not true. Most scholars agree that Jesus was probably born closer to the summertime. Sorry, I'm already going on a rant here, and it's literally the intro of the video. Anyway, before the first St. Nicholas celebration, people did celebrate Christmas, but there wasn't really much in the way of celebrating. It was technically a feast day, but it wasn't really family-oriented. There definitely wasn't a gift exchange. The Catholics of Rome began this tradition in 336 AD as a way to unite new Christian Rome with old pagan Rome. The new Christian belief system was really just used as a veneer over Sol Invictus Day and Saturnalia, but ultimately the celebration has little to do with Jesus. I know the 1700s seem like they were a really long time ago, but if you think of things in terms of long time like I usually do, that's ridiculously recent. Christmas is brand new. So many of our celebrations and holidays seem to be brand new. It's almost like the world was reinvented after. There are some old world traditions that are still practiced. Some of the ancient Christmas is still in there, and we're going to go over a few examples here today. But in comparison, the ancient belief systems lasted thousands of years. Hell, I even know people who still meticulously practice Yule every year. But even more mind-blowing is that most of the media, music, culture, traditions that we associate with Christmas today were actually popularized between the 1940s and 1960s. Think the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer animation. We're gonna go over that today too. Oh yeah, and I mentioned in an earlier video that there's a parallel between the story of Christmas and the apocalypse. Yeah, keep that in mind for later. So what were the original traditions of Christmas? And what version of it were we left with today? If you want to go right back to the beginning, it wouldn't be surprising if Christmas was the oldest cultural observance in history. The concept is really logical. Christmas literally marks the end of the winter solstice, when the sun starts rising back up again from its lowest point on the horizon. Both a celebration of the rebirth of the sun, but a time to mark the beginning of the winter season. It was everyone's last chance to get their together before the harsh winter weather would completely change the way that they lived their daily life. The pagan tradition that seems to hold the closest resemblance to modern Christmas is Yule, observed by the Celtic Druids as well as a few other cultures in Western Europe, but it seemed to have ties to a few other contemporary beliefs. Most famously, they used a Yule log, which was a large, dense piece of oak that was meant to be lit for the duration of the festival. Like a menorah, the idea was to keep a flame while we waited for the sun to return. And of course, they even had a Yule tree, much like a Christmas tree, decorated with natural ornaments. There were usually lots of animal sacrifices, mostly just shoring up livestock that they weren't sure they were going to be able to feed throughout the winter, but this was also the deadline to have food preserves ready, as the final harvest had already been collected and the food they had to last them until spring, maybe longer. This is why we now eat extremely rich foods, desserts, jams, mince meats, whatnot today. We would share in the excess of our annual food stores as a show of good faith and camaraderie, but also as a show of confidence that winter will go well and the food will not need to last us longer. The social aspect of these holidays were really important in a time period when the harsh winter could breed desperation. And the Anglo-Saxons were basically doing the same thing at this time. Sol Invictus Day, the birthday of the sun god. And this tradition actually has a common ancestor with Yule. And if you want to go way back, the Green Man's very first evolution, as trinities became all the rage around the world, the Green Man was turned into a trinity: the Oak King, the Holly King, and the White or Golden Goddess. Basically, the belief was that the seasons of the earth were ruled by the effects of this war in the heavens. The two kings in perpetual battle with each other to gain control of the sun wheel and for the love of the goddess. The story goes that on the summer solstice, the Holly King rises up and battles the Oak King, forcing the sun closer to the horizon until the Oak King is killed on the winter solstice, only to be born again and battle the Holly King back until the Holly King is killed on the summer solstice, basically doubling up on the Green Man mythos. The Holly King is clearly a prototypical Santa Claus character. The parallels are undeniable. St. Nicholas was intentionally designed to look like the Holly King. The Roman Catholics did that on purpose. He's even often associated with wandering around the snowy wilderness for some reason. This is the very beginning of the good green man versus evil red man archetype that I spoke about in my Jesus video. This is where we get our Luke versus Vader, our Jesus versus Satan story. But with the elements of the woman, it also evolved into folk tales like Robin Hood, the love for Maid Marian getting in the middle of the struggle between the altruistic green man, Robin Hood, and the authoritarian red man. All of these tales and legends are ways of describing the movements of the constellations across the sky throughout the year. It's really hard to find reference to this goddess character in the Oak King story. It seems that she may have suffered the same fate as Asheroth. In the Bronze Age, there was this pattern where the female aspect of trinities was being erased from cultures around the world. I actually only found out about this story in the first place because it's really important within certain witchcraft or Wiccan circles, which makes a lot of sense when you realize that in the Bronze Age, all of the religions were starting to become really patriarchal. The new religious powers didn't want female archetypes that might actually empower women. They were like, no. Women are property. Even though we know several of the stories of the Oak King fairly well, and that the traditions were practiced by Nordic, Germanic, and Celtic people sometime during the Neolithic Age and before that, we don't actually know from where those traditions originated. It's a little frustrating that the genesis of the Green Man character has been lost to history. But it's kept alive by Wiccan traditions today, and it's also a really important part of arcane alchemy. One day, guys. I promise, one day. I mentioned years ago that Odin also has a tie to the Santa Claus character. His red coat and white beard an example. I wouldn't consider Odin a direct ancestor of Santa, but the archetype is present in Odin's story. Remember, Odin rides an 8-legged horse, just like Santa's 8 reindeer. I'm telling you guys, Santa is a harbinger of the end times. Rome had Saturnalia, of course. This was the main tradition in the Western world for like 1,000 years. And clearly it was an important holiday, as slaves would take over as slave masters, and the masters would play the role of slaves. I almost need to do a whole video on Saturnalia because it almost proves my point about Saturn worshippers looking at the sun waiting for it to cause another apocalypse. It was an old holiday, so clearly it would have had several different iterations, but I've read theories that there was a time when people would have been running rampant through the streets, the laws revoked, everyone drunken, acting like animals, the world was upside down, almost like people were living like it could have been their last days. And we finally get to St. Nicholas. He was kind of boring. His most notable deed was that he would secretly donate money to this family in need by sneaking up onto their roof and throwing coins down their chimney. The earliest version of Santa only left small gifts in children's stockings. Have you been a good girl or boy? Well, then you get dried fruit, maybe a candy or a trinket. But if you've been a bad girl or boy, then you get coal. But Santa is not yet synonymous with Christmas around the world. Everyone's still sort of doing their own thing, and all the different traditions are going to later amalgamate into what we now know as Santa. For example, Kris Kringle is one of Santa's names today, but this is actually coined off of the term Christkindl, which is German for Christ child, because apparently German children at one point believed that it was the baby Jesus who visited their homes and left them gifts. I remember as a child, I had an angel on my Christmas tree that looked exactly like the way they depict the Christkindl. And I think that it's so obvious that this is the next evolution of the white goddess, sitting on top of the Holly King's tree after he defeated the Oak King. If you need further proof that Santa's evil, if you think about it, the purpose of Santa is not to find an excuse to anonymously spoil your child every year, but it's used as an incentive to get your child to behave by promising them a reward at the end of the year. And if they failed, they would be punished. They get a lump of coal, plus some vague tie to Jesus and sin or some crap. It was clearly manipulative and not fun at all. But the problem is that coal is kind of useful, and God forbid the children actually burn the coal and stay warm, or trade it in for a piece of candy. That would defeat the purpose. So they had to ramp Santa up a bit by giving him a companion. The Krampus. This evil demon would follow Santa to every house and inflict harsh punishment on naughty children. And it wasn't like Santa's adversary or nemesis. Santa was bringing this guy with him. Like, yes, that's the child right there that I'd like you to torture, evil demon. Thank you for your service. Let's get a beer after I'm done with this cookie. The fact that people try to carve any semblance of jolly festive holiday out of these traditions and then try to say that it has anything to do with Jesus is hilarious. The war on Christmas is a joke. The more that the ancient pagan traditions peek through the Christian veneer, the more obvious that it is. I've already spoken at length in that Jesus video about how the Gospels parallel the story of the Green Man and the Winter Solstice Festival. Jesus is used as an obvious parallel to the sun in the biblical story. He's dead for 3 days before rising again, just like the sun is on the lowest point of the horizon for 3 days before being reborn on the 25th. Most pagan traditions marked the movements of the sun with the sun cross wheel. When the sun was at its lowest point on the cross on the winter solstice, that's when it was hanging on the cross, like Jesus hung on the cross. The perpetual battle between the Oak King and the Holly King is what kept this sun wheel spinning. Anyways, one day in 1931, Coca-Cola decides to make these cute little ads with a jolly fat Santa drinking their famous cola. And these ads would become instantly iconic. I'm sure that everyone has seen this version of Santa before. Well, before this, Santa didn't have a standard depiction. Most people interpreted Santa as having a green coat and maybe even a hood or a crown of some sort. And he would wander through the forest with a stick. There were lots of different ideas for Santa before this. Well, Coca-Cola changed Santa forever. Everyone loved this plump, cheerful version of Santa so much that it was very quickly adopted by multiple cultures. But not just the way that he looked, but the idea behind him, the way that he behaved, and also the corporate spin behind him. That's right, if you didn't already think that Santa was evil enough, he's now a tool of the corporations. People generally don't like being advertised to. I mean, if an ad is good enough, then it's not so annoying. But for some reason, people seem to even like some ad characters, even look forward to the time of the year that they get to see them again and buy their delicious products. Santa suddenly no longer leaves coal. Coal has just become an empty threat. Instead, Santa only leaves diabetes and crippling credit card debt. That rhymed. Anyways, the new Santa told all the little sheeple that they have to buy. This includes trinkets and ornaments to decorate the home. And this is where Germany comes in. After World War I, they were struggling to earn money off of exports. And with Coca-Cola now making Christmas novel, this created a huge boom in exports of Christmas items from Germany. This created a huge surge in the popularity of Christmas, seeing 2 Christmas theme parks opening up in the United States in the 1940s, 7 more in the 1950s. In fact, a lot of the things that you would consider a staple of Christmas came out of Germany during this time, famously including the Christmas tree, which they call the Tannenbaum. If you think about it, stories like Scrooge in The Christmas Carol are designed not to celebrate Christmas, but to perpetuate the boosting of the economy. See, the boost in the economy that we get every year during Christmas suddenly became really important. Now when you recontextualize stories like Scrooge and the Christmas Carol, you realize that it's not really designed to celebrate Christmas, but instead to perpetuate this boosting of the economy, and to make sure that everybody was getting on board with this Christmas idea. See, Scrooge is a monster, not just because he's an evil boss, but because he hates Christmas and refuses to get into the Christmas spirit. The message of the play is clear. If you don't get with Christmas, then you. Originally buying a roast goose for the Cratchit family, later versions of the play changed it to a roast turkey. At the time, a turkey was an exotic animal, and it had to be imported to England, a status symbol of wealth, as it would feed a family in excess. Again, perpetuating the idea that Christmas is about excess. Even the ghost of Christmas Present is designed to look like Santa. He's often depicted as being a glutton. This looks just like the Holly King. In the ancient traditions, sharing in the excess made sense because we were the ones creating the excess. Suddenly, we're now spending money in excess instead, and we're getting fat simply because that's what the commercials told us to do. Then leading up into the 1950s and 60s, this is when the most popular media comes out reinforcing the idea of the holiday, and spending money and family and some crap, I don't know. And this is how we end up with the truly iconic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer animation from the 1960s. One of the most memorable pieces of media in American history. The message seems wholesome enough, though it might not have aged too well.
They are all very sad at the loss of their friend, but they realize that the best thing to do is to get the women back to Christmas Town.
Santa does straight up treat Rudolph's nose like an embarrassing problem that needs to be fixed immediately, even though he has no reason to.
Great bouncing iceberg. I'm sure it'll stop as soon as he grows up, Santa. Let's hope so if he wants to make the sleigh team someday.
I don't know, seems kind of incredible to me. I think I'd be really interested if one of my animals could just suddenly bioluminesce, but whatever, be a dick about it. Rudolph works as a song, as the story of an underdog rising above expectations. In the song, the reindeer hate him because he's different, and then it's the virtuous Santa that comes along and says, "No, reindeer, you're wrong. Rudolph is amazing." But in the cartoon, Santa also hates his nose, and then he doesn't even really apologize for the years of mistreatment, but whatever. C'est la vie. It was accurate to life at the time, at least. The elf serves as a co-protagonist, dressed in blue to complement Rudolph's red nose, just like the red and blue colors of Jesus's robe. These characters are basically the Jesus or the Luke Skywalker of the film. The elf wants to learn about being a dentist, a type of doctor. The elf represents wisdom, just like in all the other versions of the Green Man story. Rudolph is really more like Odin in this story. The red nose represents the single eye of Odin, and the elf is a comparison to the head of the god of wisdom. In fact, the elf's name is Hermes. That's a reference to Hermes Trismegistus, who's one of the most important characters in alchemy. Hermes famously likened himself to Thoth, the Egyptian god of knowledge. During their entire adventure, they're being relentlessly hunted by Bumble, the abominable snowman, who just has no chill. The Bumble represents natural disasters. In the story, he's following Rudolph's red nose around. Every time Rudolph's nose goes off, basically, a disaster happens. Translation, everywhere Odin goes, destruction ensues. It's so weird that Futurama's killer robot version of Santa Claus is the most accurate one. I wish that was a joke. Yukon Cornelius sacrifices himself to defeat the monster, but despite what seems like his death, he's resurrected before the climax of the film. Another Jesus parallel. When the team arrives at the island of misfit toys, Rudolph and the dentist elf finally find a place that they fit in. When they meet the leader, the king of the misfit toys, the whole island suddenly makes sense. The king of the misfits is a sphinx. He represents God in this story, but he's literally Jesus. I know that that's confusing because I said that Rudolph is Jesus. Then there's this really weird part where Jack Skellington comes in. He's like, "Hey, Gregory is a nightmare. Gregory, this is a nightmare." save these people, Gregory. It's your fault, Gregory. The nightmare is your fault. Anyways, Lion Jesus recontextualizes what's happening in the North Pole. There's a social hierarchy, and those who don't fit in with the order become social outcasts. Santa, the evil red god of the North Pole, is the one who created this social hierarchy, and we saw this in action with the way that he treated Rudolph at the beginning of the film. And because the system rejected Rudolph for being different, he literally becomes an outsider on the island of misfits, despite the fact that he has a pure heart and good intentions. The king of the misfits is technically a misfit in that lions don't have wings, but in reality, we know that he's really a sphinx, which I told you before is a representation of the green man, Jesus. And likely he'd be loved by any kid. But he's rejected that social hierarchy. He sees the truth in it. The standards that would see him elevated above the other misfits means nothing to him. He doesn't value himself based on that system. So he hides from the adoration of the masses and chooses to be with the misfits. His people. Jesus famously had a troupe of misfits that would follow him around everywhere he went. Sure, it was poor, sick, prostitutes. Everyone knows about those ones. But it really would have been anyone that lived an alternative lifestyle that ultra-strict society would have pushed to the outside. And it wasn't even that long ago that having a tattoo would make you that person. Being gay would make you that person. I'm rambling. I'm getting to the point here. Satan finally learns his lesson and realizes that he needs Rudolph to fulfill his master plan of abusing children with his outmoded punishment reward system. And he hooks Rudolph to the front of his sleigh to light the way through the foggy night. Right? We all know that part. But do you know what that part symbolizes? Remember the imagery that I described before. Think about 8 reindeer in the sky lit with a single red light. That's one-eyed Odin on his 8-legged horse. A symbol of the apocalypse. That's the Great Phoenix. That's the Dragon of Revelation. When Santa picks up all of the misfit toys from the island, that represents the rapture, as he carries them away and they float off of his sleigh. And I don't think that I need to explain what this represents. I've talked about this enough. I'm going to do more episodes on how the apocalypse is secretly celebrated in media. I got a lot of pushback for that in my Sphinx video, but I stand by that. In 2022, I'm going to show you a lot more examples. I just thought that Rudolph would be a really fun example to start with because it's such a head trip. I didn't even get to the talking snowman. This is bananas. Anyways, before we go, remember the wow or the whoa symbol from the last video? This is the oldest letter symbol in our alphabet. I proposed that this is the Great Phoenix and that we call this the whoa because when people saw it in the sky, it made them all say, whoa. I think that the Star of Bethlehem in the story of the birth of Jesus was really the Great Phoenix, sacrificing itself in fire to give birth to its own egg, or in the case of the Gospels, to give birth or to pay homage to the baby Jesus. Well, in a more recent Christmas animation, The Star, an interesting thing happens when the Star of Bethlehem appears in the sky. Whoa. He just never misses, folks. Damn. I love you guys. Merry Christmas.